Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Today is Wednesday, August 14th, 2024. We are gathered for an afternoon work session with our Human and Economic Health Services Director. We have a particular focus this afternoon. It should be an interesting presentation. My name is John Kafalis, Commissioner from District 1, joined by my colleague Jody Shaddock McNally from District 3. And Commissioner Stevens is excused. We also have our county manager, Lorenda Volker. Welcome. And at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Laura.
Thank you, sir.
Of course.
I am Laura Walker. I serve as the Human and Economic Health Director for the county, and this is one of our quarterly work sessions that we have with the board, and I really enjoy having this time to present new programs and new information and just be able to share a lot of the good work that's happening in our service area. And so to that end, today, we have Carrie Weiner, our Director of Extension here at the county, and Jess Callan, one of his employees. And I'll let them introduce themselves as they're going to speak on the topic today, but getting a better connection between the county and agricultural producers in our community is really the focus of our topic today. So I'll hand it over to Carrie.
Thank you, Laura. Welcome, colleagues.
Thank you, Commissioner. Carrie Weiner, Larimer County Extension Director. Jess is really going to be the one to deliver the content today, but just to start, I think at our last Ag Advisory Board meeting, Commissioner Kafalis, you suggested this might be a good idea. Jess had been thinking similarly. What Jess has done is she did a survey of ag producers in Larimer County. We got around 100 or so responses. And I think that there's a lot of value in hearing the priorities of the ag producers. And I think one reason why Jess was thinking this would be valuable is because a lot of those issues and priorities cut across multiple departments and or the work that multiple departments touch in the county. And so it'd be a good idea to just at least raise awareness of these issues to all the commissioners, and grateful that you guys are here for us. And I think we have an agenda planned here where Jess is going to present for 20 or so minutes, talk about next steps shortly afterwards, and then leave most of the time for your questions and comments. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jess.
Great. I'm Jess Callan. I'm the Ag and Natural Resource Specialist for Larimer County. This is I think it just reached my first year on the job. So basically in this position, especially during the start, I was meeting a lot with producers and trying to understand their challenges and learning more about what is important and what producers value in Larimer County so I could be better equipped for my position. And I learned a lot through this process, and that's kind of what spurred on creating this report to really analyze all of our producers in Larimer County and see generally what their challenges are and what their needs are. And through that process, I've created this report, and I'll just go a little bit more into it. But it is a draft report, as you can see, so please don't share this widely with other colleagues or the public until it is completely finished. There's a couple more data to process, a little bit more pages to add on to be completely ready and publishable for the public, for other extension colleagues, and for the county as a whole. So this is a table of contents. So we'll start with the background of why the survey was created, and then we'll go into some of the demographics and farm and ranch characteristics, and what are the five-year goals for our producers, and then kind of go into their challenges and more details about some of the specifics of those challenges. So the purpose of this survey is to understand the challenges our producers are facing, especially as our population in Larimer County is growing, and that will significantly increase in more of the county areas and also in the municipalities. And so in the county, we have a lot of farmland, and that is going to continue to decrease the amount of farmland we have as development pressure increase and development continues to grow. We can already see that the land in farm use in Larimer County has decreased by 22,000 acres from 2007 to 2022, and that is projected to increase as well. So as Larimer County producers are facing these challenges, The goal of this survey is to understand these challenges, to reduce barriers, and create more opportunities for producers in Larimer County. This is a timeline of the survey. So in December 2023, that's when I conducted a small focus group for producers and really asked them about what their challenges are, what they see that the county could help them with. And then from that, I created a survey from the responses, took it to the Ag Advisory Board in March of 2024, got their comments on it, edits, and then from the edits from the Ag Advisory Board and other county departments, such as the Natural Resources Department, I was able to take that and create a final survey and distribute it widely to producers, and we had about 101 responses. Now, this is the part where I'm presenting the report to you all, and then hopefully the next step will be presenting it more to the public and other extension colleagues and organizations. So here are the demographics of the report. So you can see we had 101 responses, but actually about 75% of those people completed the survey. It was a long survey. We had a lot of questions on it, but we tried to make it as concise as possible. The respondents were mostly white, not Hispanic or Latino, and between the ages of 35 to 54, as you can see in the graph below. And then we had nearly evenly distributed between male and female responses. And then, which was a really good thing, is that we had an even number of new and beginning farmers, which they have less than 10 years of experience, and established producers. Because sometimes what we see in extension is that we work a lot with new and beginning producers, helping them with their businesses, getting them started. And I was really happy to see that we reached both established producers and new and beginning producers. This is the demographics of the farms, where the farms are located. So these are the producers' farms. The producers that took the survey, their farms are located mostly in Fort Collins, Wellington, and then we also have the Berthoud area. And so we had the highest number of responses in Fort Collins. And the producers could choose up to, they just put in their zip codes. They could put in 3 zip codes if they wanted, because sometimes producers have farms in different areas. So here are the farm and ranch characteristics, the leasing status of the respondents. Most of the producers own the land, and some lease land from others, lease land to others, or they own and lease land. So we found that most of the respondents own the land they operate on, but 35% of those respondents also lease additional land as well. So that means that the producers that have land, some of them, 35% of them, need additional land to fulfill their operation. And so we're starting to see that access to land pressure, which we'll see more in the challenges. And so here's the average annual gross sales of the respondents. We see that 34% of the respondents make more than $100,000 in average annual sales, and so that's the majority of the respondents make less than $100,000 in average annual sales. And then we can see that the majority of the farms and ranches are at cattle and calf operations, and we have a pretty good amount of vegetable fruits or tree fruits, and then 10% of the respondents had their main sales from more commodity crops, which is like grains, oilseeds, dry beans. We wish we saw that a little bit higher, but other than that, this basically shows what we see in the ag census of what our demographic is in the county. Here are the results from the soil health questions. And so we asked the producers or the respondents what were the number of soil health practices they have on their farm. And soil health practices are, we listed multiple, all that are categorized under NRCS as soil health practices. We had majority of the respondents had more than 3 soil health practices, and 19% had 6 to 7 soil health practices. So that's really positive. The different irrigation methods our producers are using, 63% of producers are using water-efficient irrigation methods, such as sprinklers and drip irrigation. And the sprinklers are center pivots, lateral irrigation, overhead sprinklers. So that's really positive to see that producers are using water-efficient irrigation methods. And then, also for soil health, we see that the majority of the soil health practices that producers are using are rotational grazing, which makes sense because we have a lot of cattle and calf producers, incorporating trees or plants for conservation purposes, and manure management or nutrient management. So that's really positive to see the amount of soil health practices producers are using and also the different types. Now to land preservation. So we wanted to ask specifically the producers about their understanding of conservation easements and how many of them have a conservation easements. Natural Resources Department asked us to ask this question, and I think it's very relevant. So 22% of the respondents said that they have a conservation easement on their property. And of the 78% of the respondents that said they don't have a conservation easement, 28% are not familiar at all with a conservation easement. 53% are moderately familiar, and only 18% of those are very familiar. So conservation easements are one of the top ways that we preserve farmland in the county. And so it's just important to see with these results how we could push education of conservation easements so that producers are more aware of the opportunities they have to preserve their land. We also asked producers what is the best farmland preservation tool. And we saw that the top two were growing the use of ag zoning and financial incentives for ag land conservation purposes. So that ag land conservation practices could be soil health practices, water efficient irrigation methods. Any of those practices, if they had financial incentives, they said that that would be a really good preservation tool. They also said that growing the use of ag zoning would be very helpful. And we'll see more of that in the challenges of why they said that that was a great tool. So here are the 5-year goals for our producers, and this is really positive. Most of them said that they want to improve the profitability of their farms and ranches, work on strategies to keep their land and water in agriculture, and expand or diversify their operation. So and only 5% said that they want to cease to operate their farm or ranch business in the next 5 years. So producers have very great goals of improving their profitability and also conserving the land. And I think that as a county, we can value those goals and help them in that process as well. Some of the other responses were retirement, increasing efficiency, giving back to the community, and implementing regenerative practices. I think the increased efficiency, someone said, work less, rest more. So that's very valid response. So here are the producers' challenges. So this takes a little bit of an explanation, but you can see this, I'll just explain. So we have greatest challenge, moderate challenge, and minimal challenge, and then these are all of the ag issues. These issues came out of a lot of working sessions that I had with farmers and then also with the Ag Advisory Board. And all these issues have more details that go with them that I'll include in the at the end of the survey for the final survey. But for land use building codes and permits, this was just in the survey, it had more information that went with it. And the information said, example, challenges building a farm stand or building a barn or housing for labor. And then each of the producers could choose on a scale of 1 to 5 how challenging the issue was. So if they chose 1 to 2, that was a minimal challenge. If they chose a 3, that was a moderate challenge. And then if they chose a 4 to 5, that was their greatest challenge. So you can see in orange that that's the greatest challenge, and then we scaled that from highest challenge to lowest challenge. So land use, building codes, and permit is the producer's greatest challenges, and then water, adjacent land use, and access to land. So those are some of the top issues that our producers are facing, and ones that we can address as a county to help them with their goals and continue operating. Now, these are the challenges if we filter them, the survey respondents, by different categories. So for the cattle and calf producers, if we filtered that in the survey and then asked what their greatest challenges are, the data showed that the greatest challenges were water, adjacent land use, and access to land. And then you can see that each of these categories have different challenges. And you can kind of see overall where the colors are and how frequent those challenges show up across the board. And so this can help us kind of pinpoint down for land use, building codes, and permits, what producers are having that as their largest challenge and why. So we know that it's vegetable, fruit, and flower producers. And why could that be an issue? Is it because of farm stands? Is it because vegetable, fruits, and flower producers have to have wash packs, cold storage processing facilities, a lot of infrastructure that can cause a lot of challenges when it comes to getting permits and building codes. We can also see that adjacent land use continues to pop up. And access to land we can see is in categories where the producer needs land. So they have livestock that need a large operation. So access to land is harder and harder to get. So that's for cattle and calf producers, dairy producers, and more established producers. And then we can see with the difference between new and beginning producers versus established producers is that for new and beginning producers, their challenges are water, land use, building codes, and business operations. But as they get more experience and more years, the established producers' challenges are adjacent land use. As adjacent land use, I didn't explain earlier, but that's non-ag neighbor conflict, that's development pressure, traffic, those types of things. That's the challenges that come with adjacent land use. And then if we dive specifically into the challenges, we wanted to ask this question about what are their challenges when when selling to commercial markets. And commercial markets are anything like restaurants, coffee shops, food trucks, catering, brewery, etc. And so with the producers that said, yes, this is a challenge for me, the top 3 challenges that they had when selling to local commercial markets were time to engage in markets, cold storage space, and ability to scale the production for the buyer. And so this is really helpful for us because we're actually planning to make an event that is a networking event for producers and commercial markets. And so we were excited to see that that was their top challenge. So our event is strategized to help with this top challenge. And then here are the challenges associated around water. So we know that water is one of their greatest challenges, but why? Like, what's the details? So cost of water is very high. Water limitations during drought and dry seasons, and then also the municipality lease contracts are only for a year. So those producers do have goals of increasing their profitability, but it's hard to know how much you can grow the next year if your municipality lease contract is only for a year, because then you can't plan that you'll have 50 acres of dry beans if you can only get this amount of water, and then you can actually only grow 10 acres of dry beans. So even though that your 5-year plan is to have an increase in your profitability and all these things, the water might be the biggest limitation for you to actually complete your 5-year goal. And sometimes cost of water and water limitations during drought and dry seasons really work together in that way, because a producer might only get this amount of water because the municipality will say that there's a drought or a dry season, you're only going to get this amount of water, and they'll either limit the amount that they're going to plant, or they'll eat the money and pay more and have more acres and water them and hopefully break even. So there's a lot of challenges that producers are facing with water, and a lot of that can relate to working with those municipalities, and they're all somewhat correlated together. Another issue is that it's hard for producers to plan what soil health practices they're going to do if their municipality lease contract is only for a year, because if they want to implement cover crops, that's going to take water, and then they don't know should they use the water on their cover crops that will benefit the soil, or their crops that will help them financially from year to year. So the water really influences the amount of conservation practices that farmers can do as well. So this is one I wanted to ask as well for the producers is, what resources or assistance would you most need from extension from the county that would most benefit your livestock operation? And so most of the producers said that they would love resources or assistance with pasture and rangeland management. And then another top 3, another thing that they said that was important was access to animal health products and supplies and new technologies. And those new technologies can be virtual fencing, drones, using drones for ranching operations, some of those new things that CSU is doing. And then if you split them out by differences in sales, the larger producers that are making more than $350,000 in average annual sales said farm biosecurity was their second greatest need. And then for producers that are smaller, they said that farm biosecurity was their third greatest need. So there's just a little bit difference, but in the needs of the producers varied by operation size. But this was important for us to know as extension that pasture and rangeland management assistance is greatly needed and would benefit livestock owners. These are some results and general comments from the survey. I don't have time to read them all out, but I wanted to include them because I felt like you could see the emotion that the producers are having with these challenges and with the county, and in positive and negative ways. And I think that it's important to, read these comments and understand that there's this general trend that producers are facing, and that general trend we can see in those overall challenges as the top three of land use, building codes and permits, water, and access and adjacent land use. So the appendix kind of slipped in there last minute. I see that mine doesn't have the appendix page just randomly in the packet, but that's why you can see that this is a draft, and it will be more, it'll be better in the final version. But that is the survey, and the next step on the agenda was talking about what's next for the survey. We have all this great information. What are the next steps? And so the next steps is to work through the data a little bit more, see if there's any more relationships that I see in the data, if anything needs to be added to the report, clean it up a little bit, especially the appendix section. And then we're going to print and bind them and send them in the mail to a lot of the organizations that we work with directly in Larimer County. And to the commissioners and other people in the county that would benefit from it, and then send it out digitally to our producers, and share if they want to share it with the public. That's fine, but we really want to see that the producers have access to this survey because they put so much work into responding to it and helping me share it with the public. And so those are kind of who I'm going to share it with, and we hope to have it done by September. So, yeah.
So, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Jess. Well done. I suspect we have some questions and some feedback. Commissioner Shaddock McNally, would you like to begin, please?
I would like to make some comments and ask some questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you. First,
Yeah.
This is very interesting. As someone, as the only commissioner who lives in unincorporated Larimer County, does a little regenerative farming myself and has some things that we do, this is very interesting to me. My first question, just curiosity on my part, and I don't know if this is not considered, but I do know that forestry is kind of considered a form of agriculture. And we're doing a lot of things in Larimer County. There's some producers, there's some folks who are doing some great work, and I didn't know that was something that was considered as part of being folks to be part of the survey or have some of that that form of agriculture in the report, or some include them in this this outreach. Curious about that.
Yes. And I did have other people comment about including forestry in some way. I guess that at the end of the day, we did have to try to bring it in just a little bit more to really try to not have the survey too large and almost in a way scary for people to take, of like, I don't want to start this survey, it's too large and it has too much information that I don't think applies to me. So that's kind of why we didn't include forestry. And in these initial conversations with people and the people I was talking with, it seemed like the challenges for producers, farmers and ranchers was a lot different than the challenges with forestry. And so we wanted to try to get general farmers and ranchers. But I think that forestry would be interesting to see eventually And maybe there is a little bit, it is a little somewhat comparable to the challenges that the farmers and ranchers are facing.
Yeah, and I know they are struggling too, because we do have a woody biomass issue in Larimer County in terms of wildlife or wildfire mitigation, but also just how do we mitigate that. And so I think it's maybe an interesting connection. I serve on the Forest Health Council, and one of the priorities that we sent to the legislature, which got picked up and is actually being talked about with Carrie Rollins from CSU and the governor's office at this moment, I think, is a proposal about how we connect extension with forestry and kind of that workforce capacity and how we need to deal with the woody biomass. So just want to plant a seed there that this is something that maybe is important because it's also important for watersheds that helps with ranchers and farmers. And so I just kind of wanted to plant that seed. I did want to say I like the comment on page 11 about the land preservation. I really think that's an important thing to highlight. And I was very interested in not familiar at all or very familiar, and kind of some of those comments. I think that's really valuable for a lot of us. And I'm curious about when you talk, so I'm pleased to see that, but that prompted me to think about one of these high concern areas of the land use code and just want to make sure I'm using the same language, building codes and permits. Because it seems like that's the greatest challenge. And I'm wondering, is it, because we have been trying to be very thoughtful in the land use codes, we've done some revisions. And so, and we did make tiny home legals. Larimer County fought to make tiny home legals and on chassis and things. So I'm curious, with that question, do you feel like it's because of their outreach, or do they maybe need more help understanding the process and how to navigate and being encouraged to work with our community development? I'm just curious if you think there's a little disconnect, and because I think that says, oh, there's a problem with your codes, but maybe it's more of a communication and maybe a partnership in navigating. I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yes, there's a lot within that. And talking to producers and hearing their story specifically, it kind of goes all around the board to all different types of producers that are having challenges with the codes, the planning department, building department. One thing that I thought, when I found that this was the top issue, I was like, what are other counties doing? And I reached out to Boulder County and I talked to their rural use planning department person. They have a rural use planning department person that works, I think she was hired by the sustainability department and also the planning department. So she works with both. And she found a similar issue that was happening in Boulder County, is that there was this disconnect between the producers and the planning department. And I think how she explained it to me is that what her position does is she kind of fills that gap, almost how I do with the county. So she can work directly with the producers and work specifically on their permits that they send in. She can work with them, and she's already going after the barriers that she sees and saying that this is a barrier. This is what we say in the planning department will be really good for urban land use, but it doesn't apply when it comes to rural land use, and our producers are having issues with that. And so she'll go and address that barrier and then work with the planning department so that the planning department understands the producer's perspective of it and can address that barrier efficiently. And so that's what Boulder County has done and she's actually, one of the biggest issues that producers have is, especially around vegetable farms, is making a farm stand. It's hard for them to, the process they have to go through planning and then all the different parts of the planning department and then go to the building codes and all the different parts of the building department. And then it takes several years and they lose that income. And so what she's done in Boulder County has actually created a blueprint of a farm stand that any producer in Boulder County can use. And it's already passed the building codes, all of the regulations and laws. And so it's a quicker way that producers can almost bypass that system so that they can get their farm stand immediately made and start making that income. So it is like a communication piece. The codes are there, but maybe they're not communicated to the producers. And the producers are having challenges, but they're not communicated to the planning department because there's not that like liaison person. And so that's how I saw that Boulder County has done it really efficiently by having that liaison person that will specifically work on the rural land use permits and things like that.
I appreciate that you took the initiative to kind of reach out and talk about that, and then also just kind of that you dug into that a little bit more.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that. I'm sure I'll have more questions, but I know we have to think about time, but thank you for
Yeah.
that explanation. I
Sorry.
appreciated it. Thank
That was
you.
a very long-winded
No,
explanation.
no, I think it's great, and I appreciate your initiative to reach out and see what others were doing. That's great.
And we have a meeting with the planning department and the building department next month. We had to reschedule. It was going to be this Monday, but we're starting to have those initial conversations.
I have a few comments and perhaps a number of questions. First of all, to highlight, I think, a comment that our Larimer County Extension Director made earlier. I wanted to point out that in this room, this Commissioners' Conference Room, we have someone from Behavioral Health, we have someone from Economic and Workforce Development, we have someone who works on housing stability issues, and of course, we have our friends and partners at Colorado State University, because Larimer County Extension is linked at the hip, at least, with CSU Extension. So I just wanted to highlight that because there are a lot of connecting of the dots, and so I thought that was important to point out. Regarding one of your comments, Jess, and hopefully I still can remember some of my questions, on the outreach to Boulder County regarding their farm stand template, I thought we had talked about that maybe even last year, and I'm wondering, are we still talking about it, or are we taking their ideas and actually implementing them here in Larimer County to help address some of the issues related to farm stands? And also to the credit of our land use folks and our chief building official, I mean, we did develop some material that we hoped would clarify what needs to be done, what square footage and all that. Would you care to comment on that? I thought we were going to do that.
Yes. So when I talked to the rural land use person in Boulder County, she, and I'm forgetting her name at the moment, but I can find it later. She said that the city of Fort Collins reached out to her for that blueprint, but she hasn't got any contacts from the county to reach out for that blueprint when it's finished. And it's almost finished at the moment, but.
So that to me is a very tangible action item. When will we do the reach and determine if we can use that blueprint here?
And I think it's that communication piece of once we have that blueprint and we have codes that are, addressing the challenges producers are facing, but that communication piece is the next step of how are we going to communicate what we have to the producers.
I could just add, I think the important part for me is making sure that we link up internally with the county community development folks and just to better understand their history, what they've done and what they haven't. I don't feel like personally I have a very good understanding of that quite yet, so I wanted to make sure that we were up to speed on how they've responded to this issue in Larimer County, and if the Boulder template provides a good model for us to adopt here. I think that we've already made that contact, but just to be a good partner with that department, just, giving them the chance to tell us how they've worked with this issue in the past. And I still don't feel like I know that answer yet. So I think the meeting in September will be really helpful for us to move forward.
Thank you. If I may, I'll just offer a few more questions and see if Commissioner Shattuck McNally wants to add some other things. So on one of the first slides about the purpose of the survey, farmland decreasing by 22,000 in the last perhaps 15 some odd years. What's happening to that land? Is it all becoming houses?
Yes. So this was from the ag census, and so it didn't mention if the farmland, if the producers just stopped farming and that land is still there, but it's not in agricultural use, or if the farmers sold their property and then have sold it to development rights and have had development. We've seen ranches becoming ranchettes, and that's like very common that we've seen within the county. We've seen farms converting into neighborhood developments, and that's one thing that I received feedback on for this background page, is to get more details and information specifically on that. I kind of created this quickly, and so I think that that's one of those things that I'm going to look into more to create the final report, is those details.
Yes, it seems to me that that breakout or the more detailed information might be helpful. And I don't know if the Ag Census can provide that, or if we do any subsequent surveys, we might try to do further analysis on what is actually happening to that land, because I think that could inform, future decisions about how do we deal with this stuff.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jess. I'd like to continue a little bit more. So, on the farm ranch characteristics, all this stuff is really fascinating and
Yeah.
good, interesting and good work. And we average annual gross sales. Do we have information, the overall economic impact of the ag ranching sector, food producer sector? Is that $100 million? And then are we able to do any type of economic analysis? I think, like multiplier effects, how does that help with economic impact?
Yeah, was just going to write that down, because I think that's really fascinating to include, even in that background section of this is the economic impact that farms have in Larimer County. Because I know the one for the state of Colorado as a whole, but I'm assuming that there must be something within each of the counties to show the economic impact of farms.
For example, I think often we hear about Weld County, which is one of the biggest ag counties, and I think even the State Department of Ag will show information or numbers about the total value of ag activity in Weld, and is like a couple of $1 billion or whatever it is. So I think that would be helpful if we don't have that information here, and that would help inform our economic and workforce development folks and, that kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Yes, sir.
I would just add too, I can definitely reach out to some folks at CSU to see what they have, and that kind of thing seems to be right up their alley if we don't have something already, to see what's possible with them. So I'm happy to do that.
And our economic and workforce folks might have some of that too.
Sounds good.
Thank you. Is it okay if I do one more? Oh, we're all, yes, I guess I am. You did provide information about soil health practices. That's great. That's to see what folks are doing. I wonder, and I think it gets back to a question or comment that Commissioner Shattuck McNally made about woody biomass and forest tree farming and those kinds of things. That's part of our ag continuum. I know it's been brought up that in terms of best practices or most effective, the idea of grazing grasslands and how that might be a tool for wildfire mitigation. We know there's at least one producer out there that often brings that up. Any comments there, Jess?
Yeah, I definitely see that as a positive. I have worked with a couple landowners that have mentioned in the past that they might see sometimes almost a little bit of overgrazing when it comes to people coming in to graze a certain area for forest remediation, because they have the lease on the land. And so I think it's just, the hard thing is that as more of the farmland is being sold, and we're having more of these ranchettes and not these large areas and expansive pasture that we can have a large herd of cattle on, we're starting to see a little bit of us reaching our carrying capacity in a way in some areas. And so, that's just a tangent, but I think that it's important to think about, as we're starting to see more land being developed in areas that were traditionally, used for grazing, what is the carrying capacity that that land can now take since it's so much smaller? And that comes with, grazing for fire mitigation as well. They might bring their cows on the property, and a lot of the area is fenced in because there's a lot of ranchettes, and so the cows can't roam as freely. And so there's just like things of pasture and rangeland management things to consider when that happens, and it's just different nowadays with more ranchettes and less large ranches.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioner, would you like to offer other questions or comments, please?
Just well done.
Thank
I
you.
think, I appreciate kind of maybe the immeasurable consequences or benefits from this as you're developing those relationships, kind of ambassador for this issue, but also for the county, that we're asking questions, we're trying to understand, we're trying to and things are changing, there's adaptive silviculture, there's, the climate, and I think this is also a very invaluable tool for just trying to make those connections, and so I appreciate that very much. I also find it really fascinating, and maybe something you can maybe look into, when we talk about the 36% that have flood or furrow irrigation. I'm very curious because that is an issue, but I also know it's also important for getting some water back into the return flows, right? Because I'm now sure you're probably learning a little more about water, and we've all been taking lots and lots of hours and months and years of water education. But I'm curious if that's something that they have to, or is it because that's what the crops require, or is it because lack of capital infrastructure or money for capital to change those irrigation practices? And also, is it just resistance to best practices? I'm just curious about that. So I don't know if you ever have time to kind of dig into that a little bit, because with part of our water master plan with Larimer County, that's just some conversations. And maybe this is, 36% is, over a third. And I'm just curious about that, because that's something that maybe we need to look at in the future. And I don't know what that looks like or what the consequences are, but just something for conversation. So that's the only other thing. I have some other things I'm thinking about, but just the interest of time. But I just want to commend you for a job well done. And I know this is just draft, but it has some interesting things for thought provoking for me. And Carrie, I appreciate your support and the work here. And I just want to thank you for the relationships you're building. And I look forward to continuing this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner. I actually have a few more questions, and I think it's important that we are reaching out into the community, the farming community, to build those relationships. I think it's a very important comment. I have a few more questions. I don't want it to be too easy for you. One is regarding, I thought it was interesting, to say the least, that regarding conservation easements as an important tool for preserving open space and farmland, the percentages, and I know that you said, Jess, I believe you said that, we need to push education. And maybe it's an overarching question, because you said earlier, the next steps are, we're going to finalize the report, make sure the appendix is in the right place, and then disseminate it to all the appropriate stakeholders. That's great. But how are we going to glean from this report some very specific actionable items, like figuring out what do we need to do differently, if anything, to inform people about conservation easements? So that's an overarching question. You want to try that one, and then I have a few more specifics, and then you'll all be done with me.
Yes, I will try that one.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so the next steps after the survey is finalized and it's sent out to everyone is really going after each department and talking to and having those conversations with the departments that overlap with the challenges and the issues addressed within the survey. And so we would talk with the Natural Resources Department about this conservation easement question and develop strategies with them on how we can better promote conservation easement. I've already been doing it myself on site visits. I mentioned to producers, have you heard about conservation easement? Do you know much about it, or are you interested in it? So I think it will take a little bit more a little bit more of ideas on working with the Natural Resources Department on what are our next steps when it comes to that. So we already talked about how we're going to have a meeting with the Planning and Building Department. And so another one after that would be planning with the Natural Resources Department. So we're trying to plan to meet with the people that overlap with the issues and data that have been brought up in the survey.
That's great. I guess a follow-up question would be, are we going, based on the key takeaways from this report, which I think is more than excellent, frankly, are we going to develop some kind of a strategic plan, within the next 6 months? These are some things we need to consider within the next year. And it's good that you're talking with our internal partners, our internal customers, the departments. But for example, one of the things you highlighted was that in terms of water, which is a big deal, and apparently you can only lease water from the city. That's often come up with our Ag Advisory Board for 1 year. So in my mind, as a city slicker, but who still has a lot of work to do to harvest things, the garden is doing pretty well. To me, that would be an example of maybe part of a strategic plan that says, in the water category, we need to have a conversation, or the farmer, or somebody needs to have a conversation with the municipalities about why is it that farmers can only lease, water for 1 year. I mean, does that make sense, Jess?
Yes. I think a strategic plan would be excellent. And I think that really going after some of these topics, especially the top three, which was water, building use, planning department, permits, that long one, and then adjacent land use would be really important. And creating strategic path around that and having the certain stakeholders that we need to accomplish that would be really important. And having this so that in the next 2 years, if we do a survey like this again, we could get some data that could show that our what we've been addressing has been helpful. And maybe some of these top three challenges aren't some of the top three challenges anymore. We see more challenges that different types of challenges producers have, or less challenges. And so that's one thing we're looking at.
I just wanted to add, so point well taken about a strategic plan coming out of this. And our other strategic piece is to see how the Ag Advisory Board wants to work with this data. So they're going to be coming up with their work plan for 2025. That's on the agenda for our September meeting. And so they'll have this, and it's up to them how this might influence their work plan. But I think the hope and the initial conversations have been that they're going to use this in their work plan as well.
And that's very helpful. And I know that we're pretty good at formulating strategic plans. So it reminds me that we want to make sure, for example, the county has the commissioners, we have a 5-year strategic plan. And so that what we're considering here, complements or fits into some of that. Thank you. Just a couple more specific questions. Maybe I'm done. In terms of producer challenges, I thought it was interesting that labor doesn't seem to be as big of a deal. I wonder if you could elaborate on that. And I'm also wondering housing as it relates to farm labor, because it seems like we've heard that can be very challenging. What did you learn there, and how might that apply to what the county's role is in helping to address that?
Yeah, I thought labor would be much higher, especially because I've been in conversations in Boulder County with producers and extension around labor, and I've heard producer stories in Boulder County that are saying, I don't think I want to operate next year because all my labor left for the season. It got too hot, they didn't want to stay around, and they left. And I had to do it all myself, and I can't handle that year to year to year. So in Boulder County, it is a really big issue. It's one of their top. And so I was fascinated that it wasn't as big of a challenge in Larimer County, but it was also one of the biggest challenges, though, for more producers with average sales that are greater than $1 million. And so that's when it popped up the most. And so those producers that are having large operations or are making are having larger operations are needing qualified specific labor, and they're not able to get that in the same way, or that's one of their challenges. And I've heard in conversations with producers that qualified labor is the issue. They could hire people, students that are interested in farming, all of those things, but at the end of the day, training them takes so much work. And so getting qualified labor year after year is one of their struggles. And I think that if we address permitting land use building codes and water and adjacent land use, if some of those are addressed, I think that we'll see labor higher and
About
higher.
housing, did that come up in any of your conversations? Where
So-
do people live who are going to milk the cows?
Yes. So that came up in building codes because creating housing for ag labor, especially for H-2A workers, have to have a lot of regulations. And so working with those regulations as well as with the county's regulations on building structures can be really hard and take a long time. And that time is precious to them when they need that labor now. And so that's kind of the issue that we're seeing with producers wanting to build a small home on their land for labor that they have. So,
Thank you.
yeah.
One more question. So one of the overarching themes here is that we've been engaged in the county and community-based partners. For example, the Northern Colorado Food Partnership is how do we strengthen and make more resilient our local food system? And I think one data point that I remember, please correct me if I'm wrong, but it's in terms of the food we produce in Larimer County, a very small percentage of it is consumed in Larimer County. I thought one time that was 1%. I'm hoping it's at least 2%. Maybe you could provide that new and good news. Could you speak to that in terms of how are we making progress there, and how are we going to address that? Because I think that gets back to the economic impact thing.
Mr. Chair, if I might interrupt real quick.
Well, actually, I'd like to finish my statement. Or
Okay, but I'm just curious because the session is supposed to end at 2:30 and I have a meeting at 2:30 and we have 6 minutes and I didn't know if the other people in the room were presenting or is it just this?
no,
is-
it's just these folks.
Oh.
They're just here
Oh,
because
okay.
all of these things are connected.
Okay, I just wanted to,
Yeah,
just
and-
want to make sure I was curious.
Of course. Thank you. Okay, to make sure you all were listening, where did I leave off?
Yes. About the challenges around markets and
Well, yeah, so-
what that percentage is.
Are
of
we
the
making
local-
progress in terms of more
Yes.
food being consumed here in restaurants and in school cafeterias, et cetera, et cetera? And what is the nexus of that and how it relates to overall economic impact, multipliers and all that? Thank you.
Yes, exactly.
Mr. Good.
Yes, and so I think that we have seen that more of our producers are, in Larimer County, things have been changing in agriculture over time. We have more veg and fruit producers, and we're seeing less and less like large commodity crops, large farming and ranching operations, and we're seeing more smaller veg and fruit. And those veg and fruits producers are really good at they're one of their top markets are our local commercial markets, and directly farm to table. And so what we're trying to do in the Larimer County Extension Office, and what Carrie has already done, is hire a farmers market and food system coordinator. And so that's Maggie Switzer, and I'm working with her in food system space to create an event that will help connect local producers with local commercial markets. And so we're hoping to have that in November of this year. And hopefully that can be, if that is successful, an every year activity so that we can bridge this gap between producers and our commercial markets.
And in terms of the metrics, data people know how to do this. How do you determine only 1% of the food we make here is eaten here? How does that work? And are we working on updating that information, and are we making progress?
Great questions. And I'm going to CSU for one of your other points about economic impact, so I'll go to them with this too. I've heard the same thing about 1%. I don't know how that's determined. So I think that's a really good metric to be attentive to, and I'll try to find out
That'll be very
where that
interesting.
came from and how we can update that.
Yeah, excellent. I believe that's all I have. And just to say thank you, even though I'm kind of a city person, this stuff is actually really important. And a lot of it's born out of my relationship with one of our favorite advisory board. So I believe I'm done. Just to say thank you, much gratitude. Commissioner, I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to add, or Lorinda, if you'd like to add some wisdom here. Commissioner Shattuck McNally, we still have 2 minutes. It's all yours.
I believe I said my gratitude, and I just appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to diving into this a little bit more.
Okay.
Thank you.
And in light of that, there's a meeting at 2:30 by Commissioner Shattuck McNally at 2:27 PM. We are adjourned. This is really good.